All right.
Yeah,
Well, yeah. In that case, we're just gonna get started here. So hello, welcome to workshop number 3. We're just gonna be covering stuff like databases and authentication, and we're gonna be using something called Google Firebase to do that. Before we start, does anyone here not have the repository from workshop 2? As in like, all right, cool, that's fine. So go to this link here, vhl.inc/takehomes. All right, and then we just have a repository called workshop 3 setup. So just go here. And then, oh. All right, cool. Go to this link if you have not attended the previous workshops, or you just want to get up to date with the code. And then just click copy here. And then go into your command line or your terminal. Just open that application wherever it is, if it's under like your applications. Just like, where's terminal?
It should probably pop up when you search for it. So
yeah, just you can also search for it and just type in terminal.
you want to use like CMD or PowerShell or something.
And then if I were to, we're in the root directory right now. So we have all these different folders. I specifically just want to go to the desktop. So I would change my directory into my desktop. So now that my command line is in my current desktop, which is all these folders here, I would type git and then clone. And then this link right here that I just copied. I'm going to paste that here, and then I'm just going to run that. And then workshop 3, the setup is right here. Give you guys a couple of seconds to do that. This, and if you attended our previous workshop and everything's working, you do not need to do this step. Okay. So now I'm just going to open VS Code. And then I'm going to take this folder, and you can just drag it in, or you can just go to File, Open, and then find that correct directory here. Oh, sorry, that's wrong. File, Open, Folder. And then just go to wherever that workshop is. So mine's in desktop, workshop 3 setup, and then just open it. All right. And then what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to actually open the terminal here. So I'm going to right click, and I'm going to say open an integrated terminal. And this is just going to open a command line that's automatically in this directory. So I'm just going to full screen this for you. That was loud. And then if you see here, we want to actually get into our to-do list directory. So I'm going to type in cd change directory into my to-do list. All right. And the thing about actually importing things, or sorry, cloning things off GitHub is that they follow this thing called a git ignore. So if I were to click here and take a look, or this one, you'll see that I'm ignoring node modules. And node modules are the dependencies or the libraries like React and whatnot. And they're probably like hundreds of megabytes. So you don't want to actually push those to GitHub. Because all you can do is just run npm install. And what this will do is it will go through your package.json, and then it will see all these dependencies right here, right? And it'll install all of them immediately. So if you make sure that you're in your to-do list directory and you run npm install, npm will just go through all these dependencies and it will download all of them for you. So definitely do that, and then we'll give you guys a second. And give myself a second because it will take a while. Oh yeah, and also yeah, there's a couple of TAs here. Raise your hand. There we go. Cool. So if you guys need help at any time, just feel free to raise your hand. Feel free to stop whoever's up in front if you guys are running a little behind. And yeah.
Yeah, it's really important you got to follow along, because if you don't, then it just keeps going forward, so it's hard to catch up. So we're more than happy to stop and have someone like catch up to the point where everyone is.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run npm start so that we can just take a look at what we did in the previous workshop. So if I run that now, and it opens up Chrome. All right, we have our good old to-do list from workshop 2.
Yeah, if you've changed the CSS on yours, hopefully it doesn't look like that.
Yeah. All right. So there's a couple of things that we're going to do really quickly with this to-do list. We're going to add a date feature so that you can put like a deadline for your assignments. We're going to style it a little better by using grids so that this isn't all just one big like blob right here. And then we're going to use these things called UUIDs, which are these unique IDs that we're going to use. And I'll go a little bit more into that later. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say, like, let's say I want a deadline, right? What if my ISD assignment is due tomorrow or something like that? Well, the problem with that is that dates are really, really complicated to add for code. And that's a problem, right? Because there's all these different weeks, there's all these different months, there's all these different years. It's really, really difficult for us to physically code a calendar. So one thing that we could do, obviously, is we could use the library. So if I were to look it up, and I definitely follow along with me here in your Chrome browser, and just type in like React date picker, because that's what we really want. And lo and behold, a date picker shows up, specifically this one that's just date picker without the dash. Never mind, this one. Did they just update that? I think this is different. Okay, so if I go to React date picker and I look at this package right here, you'll see that there's a couple instructions, right? So the first thing that I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to install it, right? So I'm going to have to run this command, npm install React date picker. So I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to want to paste it in here. But first, I want to actually open a new terminal so that I can actually run it while installing this new dependency. So if you click this little add button right here, does everyone see that? It'll open a new terminal in that same directory. Not quite. I'm going to have to cd into to-do list once again because there's the folder to-do list. So cd to-do list, and this is our actual project, and I'm just going to run npm start, or sorry, not npm start. I'm going to have to run npm install this React date picker. So I'm just going to install it here. I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to install this new library for us. And that's a really cool thing about React, right? There's such a big community out there. So there's so many different libraries for all these different problems that people have already faced. And there are plenty of great solutions out there. Okay. So now what I'm going to want to do is I'm actually going to want to add it to my app, right? So I'm going to actually want to go into my source folder, and I'm going to want to go into my lists like JS right here, right? And then just like we did last week, right? We use these things called state. And state is something called a React hook that is going to be updated whenever a certain event happens. So React essentially is really, really smart, and it listens for certain events, and it watches for certain changes, and it reacts to that, kind of hence the name. So here we have a state, and we make it empty. And then whenever I type something in here, like, you know, ISD homework, what it's doing is it's constantly updating the state because that is the code that we wrote. So if I go over here, right? Where is it? Yeah, so whenever I change this input text right here, I'm using this set title function, and I'm updating it with whatever's in this space. So similarly, like we did here, we want to also do that for our date. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a new state that's going to contain our date. So I'm going to say let, because that's how we declare a variable, or you could use const here. Const would be okay as well, but we're just going to use let for our purposes. And then we're going to say date, which is our actual date. And then our function to change that date, which is going to be set date. And these are going to be destructured in an array because useState returns an array, but we don't want an array. We just want these two variables right here. So this is called destructuring an array. And it's just a perk of JavaScript as well as Python. All right, so I'm going to say equals useState, right? And then here we add our default value for our state. And our original state is just going to be the state object. So it's going to be a new date. So we're going to instantiate this new date object. And by default, this is going to be our current date right now. Are we all on the same page here? Cool. Yeah. So now what I'm going to want to do is I'm actually going to want to import my date picker. And you'll see, according to the documentation, right, this is how we do it for the date picker object. So I'm going to import date picker from React date picker. So I can just copy it, or I can just type it in, import date picker, and make sure that you spell it correctly, from React-date-picker. All right, and now that we have this component, similar to how we kind of imported our item, we're actually going to add that date picker here. So I'm going to go, let's say right after this text box, right? Because we want our date to, be somewhere here, so we can pick it here. I'm going to create that new component and call it date picker. And this will basically import this date picker component from the React date picker library. So I'm going to just do it in one tag. So it's just going to be open greater than sign, date picker, and then slash, and then less than sign, because that creates everything in one component. All right. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just save it. So just like Command S, just to save the file. And now you'll see, this is the wrong library, but whatever, it's fine. Oh gosh. So the library we use, I guess, is gone. And now we have this really, really ugly library, but we're just going to deal with it. It's fine. All right. So now we have this date picker library. This is their own custom CSS. If you really wanted to, you could go ahead and make it a lot prettier than what they've done right here. And you can just change some of these classes here in your own time. But wow, that is really ugly.
I assume the first library you opened was the one you planned to use because you had done it previously.
It's gone. It just doesn't exist anymore. No, I know. This is what it used to be, but this library is just gone. It's whatever. We'll deal with it. It's fine. It's good enough. It's fine. Yeah, so let me go back to that documentation there. Wrong one. All right, and we see that there's a couple values here, right? So there's or a couple attributes to the state picker. So whenever we change it, right, we want to update that state. And then we have the actual value itself. So if you see right here, if I keep clicking this, right, this value just never changes. Give everyone a second. So if we take a look at this documentation here, right, we can set this value to whatever our state is. So here we're using date and we're using set date. So our date picker, we're going to add these attributes, right? So on change, right, we're going to set that equal to some JavaScript. So we have to open curly brace, close curly brace. And we're just going to say, we're going to pass in this function right here, right? Set date. So I'm going to say on change, we call this set date function. This will update our date. All right. And then the value itself is actually going to be this current date, which is date, right? So I'm going to say value equals open curly brace, close curly brace, because we're using JavaScript once again. And I'm just going to say date. All right, and then if I save this, and I go and check out, you'll see that we now have this date, and we can just click here, and we can update it to the 14th, we can update it to the 19th, we can do whatever with it, right? Because our value here is constantly changing because we call the set date function. All right. So now we actually want to submit it, right? So now that we have this date, now that we have this date value that's always being updated. So let's say, you know, my ISD assignment is due on the 29th now, or something. When I submit the object, right, I want it to contain this date. So we have to go to our onSubmit function, right? And in our onSubmit function, we have to add this new attribute called date, and we have to add this to our actual to-do list. So here we're updating our to-do list with whatever used to be in the to-do list, as well as this new object right here, which is our new item that we just added. So I'm going to add this new key, and I'm going to add this new value, and we're just going to call it date, right? And it's going to be and then the actual value of that date is going to be our date variable. So you can think of it kind of like a date as kind of like a string here. And then this object has this key called date. And then that attribute itself, or sorry, the value itself is actually the variable that we called right up here. But we're just going to keep it like that. All right, and then the other thing is we're all grown up now, so we don't need this dummy data that we had here. We're going to create a real to-do list, and to-do lists do not have this dummy data, so I'm actually going to delete all this right now. So just delete that array that you had there, right? And then just our default value for our to-do list is just going to be an empty array now, right? Because we want to start off with an empty array. So I'm just going to create an empty array, which is just open brace, close brace. Are these called braces? I hope so. Brackets, yes. All right, so now if I save this, I'm just going to test it out for you. So just like ISD homework. It's due tomorrow. If I add it, you'll see that we have our ISD homework here now. You'll also notice that I actually forgot to reset this date. You don't have to do this, but remember that when we actually finish submitting, we reset that state to what it originally was, so I can type something new in here. So what you can do is you can just say, if you want, you don't have to do this, set date, new date. Just like we did up here, right? So we're resetting our default value back to what it was once we submit it. So now if I run it, I just go like VH workshop and then I set the date to like here. It resets it whenever I call that submit function. All right. Cool. So one thing that about our to-do list that we did last workshop is that it actually is pretty terrible. So if I were to, for instance, say like ISD homework, if I create a new object called ISD homework, and I were to finish my ISD homework and click here, you'll see that both of them disappear, and we really don't want that, right? And the reason why is simply because React uses keys to determine what exact values it wants to update. So you'll see here, right? We create this key, and it's just this object turned into a string. And essentially, the key for these two values, if they're both called ISD homework, it's just going to be this JavaScript string that just says like ISD homework. And also, the other problem is up here. Whenever we remove an item, whenever we hit that checkbox, we're removing it by the title, right? And the title here is the same. They're both ISD homework. So two big problems that we have there. And the solution to that is that, you know, we have to create some sort of unique ID for each individual item that we generate. And the answer for that is this library called the UUID. So if I were to go to UUID, go to their NPM package, you'll see it's by and far one of the most popular NPM packages out there, and everything's gone again for some reason. So I'm just going to go to like their homepage, maybe. Yeah. And essentially what we're doing, right, is we're going to generate an ID every time we call this function UUID v4. So the first thing I have to do is I actually have to install this package, right? So if I go into my terminal down here, I just run npm install. You could also do shorthand and do npm I. It'll set both, and I'll say UUID. Or npm install. They both mean the same thing here. It's just for us lazy programmers. All right, and now I want to generate this new ID every single time. So the first thing I have to do is actually have to import this. And you'll see that they actually do a little thing here where they say v4 as UUID v4. You don't have to do this. But essentially what you're doing is you're renaming the thing that you're importing from UUID as UUID v4. So it's a lot easier to understand what exactly you're calling. And also sometimes different libraries might have the same name of something that you might want to import. And if you have two libraries, right, and you have these two similar variables, you want to rename one of them. So this is essentially what we're doing, right? We're renaming v4 to UUID v4, which isn't necessary in this case, but it's good for readability, and it kind of clarifies what exactly this v4 function is. So I'm going to go to the top of my list, and I'm just going to say import, and then I'm going to destructure the object that's imported from UUID, and I'm going to say v4 as UUID v4. And I'm just going to follow exactly what the documentation tells us, because the documentation here is what UUID wrote for us. All right. So now, essentially what I want to do is every time I submit, I want to generate this new ID, and I want to add it to my object, right? So within the object, within our onSubmit function, we want to create this new value, right? We want to create this new key called ID. And then the attribute itself is going to just be UUID v4, and we're going to call that function. So it's going to generate this unique ID for us. And the idea behind unique IDs is that they generate this sort of really, really long, complicated string of characters and integers. And then conceptually, it's the hope that, you know, these that the thing that's generated has an incredibly impossible probability of being the same thing. And we're using specifically their version 4 of it, but yeah. All right. So now that that's done, our key is just going to be the data.id, right? So we're going through this array, and then we're getting this individual item. So this is very similar to like a for loop, right? So we're getting this individual item, and we're saying data.id. So we're getting the key ID within that singular data item. And now it will be unique, so React will know to update it. And the other thing we have to do is we actually, whenever we remove an item, we're going to remove by ID now. So instead of title, I'm going to replace these two titles with ID, because now we're just going to remove it by their ID. So if I save this now, and I just say like PL homework, it is due tomorrow, unfortunately. Oh, it's due Thursday. Thank you. And then if I were to remove one, only one gets cleared out. So good there. Yeah. All right. And the last thing you'll notice is that our date isn't actually being displayed here. And the reason why it's not being displayed there, right, is because we actually have to display it, simply put. So I'm just going to split the screen. You don't have to. You can just click item here. But just for people who are still catching up, I'm going to split it here. And we're just going to go into this item.js, and we're going to create this new p tag that contains the date. So we're going to create a paragraph tag, right? And then inside of it, we're going to get the item data's date, because that's what we said right here, right? We said that we're going to get this date key. So similar to title, we're going to get the item data.date. So here I'm going to open curly, close curly. And then within those, because we're using JavaScript, I'm going to say item data dot date. And this will not work, unfortunately, and I'll show you why. Yeah, you'll see it won't load. And if I were to inspect element and I were to see the problem, you'll see that date itself is not supported by React and by HTML. And the reason why is because this date object is an actual object with like keys and attributes and values. So it's the date, fortunately, the date object has this function called toDate_string. So this will convert this date object into a friendly string. So I'm going to say toDate_string, and I'm going to call that. So now it's taking this date and it's turning it into a user-friendly string. Bless you. So if I save this, make sure you're saving your list.js as well. And I go here, Jello. You'll see we finally have our date here. All right, how are we doing? Okay, cool. And then one last thing really quickly that we're going to do in terms of styling is that you'll see right here that this is super ugly, right? What if we want everything all in one line? Unfortunately, there is a way to do that. And I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't know how to do it until I actually looked it up. So I'm going to save you a little, given this length of this workshop, I'm going to save a little time and explain it for you. But in terms of things like CSS, they require a lot of practice. Kyle knows. Yeah. So like these are not things that you need to memorize, but you need to be able to understand, you know, like how they kind of look these things up in a way. And the first thing is that I want to essentially what I want to do, if you were to think about it, is I want to create some sort of grid. And then this grid is going to have, you know, the actual title itself right here. And then it's going to have the date right here. And then I'm going to put the checkbox all the way over here. And the way to do that is I'm going to say in my app.css file, the place where I do my styling for my item, I'm going to set the display to grid. But there's a little more to that, right? So I actually want to tell, my computer exactly how I want to split these grids. So I'm going to split them by percentages here. That's not the only way to do it. But essentially what I want to do is I want the title to take up like half of this. I want the date to take up like the other half of it. And then I kind of want to squeeze that little checkbox in the corner over here. And the way to do that is I'm going to set a couple columns for my grid. So I'm going to say grid hyphen column. I don't know. And I'm going to set it to 50%, 45%, 5%. Going to distribute them so that the first item is going to be 50%, the second item 45%, and the third is 5%. So if I save this, lo and behold, everything is aligned horizontally. That's the term, I think. But here you'll notice that this thing's a little too far up. So how do I kind of center that vertically? Well, thankfully, you can do align items center, and this will center all our items vertically here. So because this class name right here is item, and we're changing this item by using the CSS here, by using this class identifier, which is the dot, we're changing all this style for every single item that we put down. So if I save this, now you'll see that our checkbox is centered. Yay. Cool. Sam, can you help me real quick? Sorry. All right. So now that our front end for our to-do list is kind of set and it's functioning and it's all good, we're going to move on to some new stuff and we're going to learn about Firebase.
All right, so now that we're done with the front end, let's get to the back end. Today, we're going to be talking about Firebase, and this is like one of my favorite things ever. So Firebase is a software development kit or an SDK with plenty of helpful tools for building and monitoring apps. And there's like countless tools within this SDK, but we're only going to be focusing on two, and those are databases and authentication. Now, databases are pretty simple. So if you recall from our React app, every time we add some data, where's the cursor? There it is. The cursor is gone. I am moving a lot. Okay, there it is. All right, so if we add some data, we added this data, and then we refresh, the data is gone. And that's because it's stored kind of in your code. You're adding it to an array in your code. And then when you refresh, your code restarts. So it's gone, it's away. So we're trying to create a database on this website Firebase that will hold your data, even when you refresh, it's still going to be there. All right. So a little bit more about how Firebase works. What? Which one is it? Oh, geez. Okay. So in order to understand exactly how we're going to use this tool, let's take a look at how things are set up. So there's things called collections, and collections are basically just a folder. And these are collections of documents, and your documents are your items. So over here is a great example of a collection of documents. The collection is called users, and the documents within it are different users. So the first one is Ada Lovelace. They have a first name, last name, born 1815. And they have a unique identifier, a little ID up here, A Lovelace. And this has to be unique. This will come into play later. And then we have another object, Alan Turing, born 1912. So you're able to keep this data in the same folder and keep it all collected in the same place, all sorts of organized, which is super helpful. I'm going to pass it off to Aadi for off.
All right. So the thing is, I guess I can demonstrate. Let me see. drive something. Right. So the one thing right now is that because we add elements to our to-do list right now, so let me add this one. It's like, hey, there we go. But what I can also do is I can take this URL that I have, and like hopefully right now it's just on the local host. This is just running on Kevin's system. But if I were to make a service for like everyone to use, this would be hosted somewhere, probably also Firebase, which is because that is also something Firebase does. And then everyone will have access to the same link, right? So now imagine if some other person also had access to this link, right? They could, like, let's say this incognito window is another user. You go here, you add another element, and because right now we don't have a database, so you won't really see it happen in both places. But once we have a database, both of these will show up for every user. So that would be like everyone just being on like one community to-do list. That's not something we want, right? I want my to-do list to be like really my own, and I want like your to-do list to be yours. So that's why authentication comes into play. We do that with most services, well, technically all services we use, right? Like Brightspace, you authenticate yourself, you do and stuff. So we similarly want to add like authentication to our own to-do list. So only a person only has access to their own items, and they're persisted across devices, right? Like once you deploy your website, you want to be able to access it from your laptop, from your phone, probably your Kindle as well. So that's why we do authentication. Yeah. You know. Yes. I can do async as well. All right, so we're going to be making web requests. We're going to be making a lot of web requests, right? Like because Firebase is basically someone else's computer, right? So nice person at Google has like a bunch of data servers for like your to-do sites, which they graciously allowed you to use for free. So we send our data through the web. It comes back through the web as well, right? So one thing that we want to make sure is that we're not waiting for them to do things, right? So like that's where like asynchronous functions comes into play. Like it's a cool word, like asynchronous. So a nice example for this is, for example, if I wanted to like get the address of my friend Sam here, right? So I call up like a service. I'm like, hey, where's Sam's address? Now I could wait for them to like flip through like an address book or something, right? Figure out like where Sam exactly lives, and then they like tell me, and I'm still like just hanging on the phone waiting for them to like, like call me maybe. But a better way for me to do this is like I call up the service. I'm like, hey, where's Sam's address? And then I hang up and I go back and doing whatever I was doing. And once they're done finding Sam's address, they call me back and they're like, hey, you asked for Sam's address, so this is his address. That way, I'm not wasting my time while they're doing their work. Similarly, when we send a web request, we can go back and do whatever we want to do while they're processing data, and then once they have the data ready for us, they send it back to us, and then we will process the data. Does that make sense? Right? So that's what our process for web requests is. In like Python and other languages, the requests are mostly blocking unless you specifically want to make it asynchronous, right? You will like stop all work and wait for the request to come back. In some cases, so you do want to wait for the request to come back, right? For example, if my plan was to get Sam's address and then drive to his house, I couldn't really do that until I wait for me like to get the address, right? That's why we have this keyword called await. This is, all right, wait for this process to stop until you get the result from this. Async basically signifies that this function is an asynchronous function, so you will need to await it or like wait until this happens. When Kyle writes your code, you will see this in action and you will see how you use it, right? Most people, I think like 50% of people don't really understand where all this comes from or does. They just like look at the documentation, copy it over, it always works. So you never really think about this stuff. But now you know why it works the way it works. All right.
Yeah, so next time you're trying to doc Sam, use async functions. All right, so we're going to head over to VS Code. But before we do that, so if you recall at the beginning of this session, we asked you to go to firebase.google.com and make your own account. Is that all good? Awesome. All right, so we are going to create our very first Firebase project. So we're going to press get started and add project, and we're going to call it to-do list. All right. Now, when we continue, we're going to, you can enable, you cannot enable, it doesn't really matter. And then we're going to just default account for Firebase if you decide to configure Google Analytics. And then we press create project. And this is going to take a second. So we'll just wait around for a few minutes.
Just imagine someone is putting all this work right now, so like they can arrange space, so we can put our to-do-list items in their stores.
And that was easy. It is done. So I'm going to give you guys a few seconds just to let you guys catch up. And this next part is pretty easy. We're going to be using the Firestore database today, not the real-time database, Firestore database. So go ahead and navigate over there and then press create database. And we're going to start in test mode. So as we mentioned earlier, having everyone be able to access your data isn't exactly a good idea. However, we're just testing things. We're not actually having any stakes in this. So we're going to use test mode, which allows everyone to see our data. We're going to use US Central because that's where we are. And then it's provisioning our cloud Firestore. It's as easy as that. Setting up security roles.
Yeah, it might be under build, by the way, if you. And also, if your Windows like after screen, you might not show it. If those are complex.
All right. We're having some really fun connection issues, but I'll wait a few seconds so that you guys can get all caught up. Test mode, yes, test mode.
The default is pointed to the US Central, because that's where we are.
And we're essentially what we're doing is we're like storing this data somewhere on the internet, specifically like some sort of data center actually has this data set up our own configured.
All right. And so as soon as that is done, I would like you to open up, there's a button up here that says go to docs, open that in a new tab. That is very important. In coding, always have the documentation up. It's always super helpful. All right. So the next thing that we are going to do, are we all good? Okay, awesome. We are going to go to project overview. And there's going to be this little button up here. It looks like a little code. Do you see what I'm saying? It's right here beside the Android. It says web. And if we click on that, it's going to ask us for a web nickname. So we're going to call it todolist. Then we're going to, don't click the Firebase hosting, just press register. And this is where it gets really important. So make sure you follow along for this bit. So the first thing we need to do is run npm install Firebase. And this is the same thing as we were doing earlier, where we're installing the packages that we need. So make sure you're in your to-do list directory and do npm install Firebase. Exactly like that. And while this is installing, we're going to go back to this bit of code right here. And again, this is something that's super exciting and super important. So we're going to create our own file in the source directory. I think, there we go. And we're going to call it database.js. All right, and we're just going to paste everything that we just got from that app. How do I make it not? No, this is fine. Makes it less confusing, but how do I make it less split screen?
You can close
There we go. Awesome. All right, and once that's done, we're going to go back to our documentation and we're going to learn how to set up our database. So go to build, because as you recall earlier, this was in the build folder. And we're going to go to Cloud Firestore. So build, then Cloud Firestore, and then get started, which makes sense seeing as we are getting started. So we have set up our development environment. And the only thing here that was not in that file earlier is constdb is equal to Firestore app. So we're going to copy this and paste it at the end of our file. And get Firestore is something we need to import. So import get Firestore from Firebase/Firestore, copy that and put it at the top of your file. and then const db is equal to get Firestore app. And we're going to export that. So export const db is equal to Firestore app. If you recall, export allows us to use this variable in other files. Oh yeah, you can get rid of this analytics. The documentation, you can either look up Firebase document. Oh yeah, Sam's got you. Either look up Firebase documentation or Cloud's Firestore documentation, or over here, press go to docs. Either one works. This part's super important for configuring your database. I'm going to wait a few minutes for everything to be settled.
Did you import get Firestore?
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, import this up here. Following along in the docs is super important just so you can copy paste things so it doesn't like take up more of your time. But yeah, copy get Firestore from Firebase/Firestore and then copy const db is equal to Firestore app. And then make that export const db. And this is what it all should look like. I don't need this.
If Google search something like Firestore documentation, I'm sure a link to this part will pop up.
Mm-hmm. This is super helpful documentation. Somewhere behind you.
Ask a question just in general for databases. Is there sometimes do they require that password authentication to add data or store data or retrieve data? And the second question is related to that. So in this case, we have Firebase configuration that was already filled in. Is that because we went to the documentation from our created database?
Yeah, so for that second question, when you create your account and when you create your project, all those credentials are made for you. So just going to your project page and then copying them does all the work for you. For the first question about authentication, that is super important. And currently, everyone can write to your data. But Aadi is going to teach us how to make it so that you have to sign in through Google in order to edit this data. And that'll be super fun.
In terms of database level, usually like allow the person who like owns the database to have direct access to it. So then it's like your job is like in your application to restrict how you either read the database.
All right, we all good? I'm going to start looking at this next part, which is the first thing that we're going to want to do is be able to add data to our database. So I'm going to look at the docs and it looks like add and manage data seems important. And then the add data sub files. So we're at add and manage data, add data. And so as we mentioned earlier, there's things called documents and these documents go in collections. So it seems like we just set doc. Okay, sorry. We set doc with our DB, our city, our collection name, and then the ID of the item that we're adding. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to list.js. And at the top here, we're going to declare a new variable that's going to be super important. I'm going to call it a const because we're not going to change it. And we're going to call it collection name. And this is going to be tasks, because that's what we're going to name our collection, because it's a collection of tasks. So the next thing that we are going to do is whenever we submit this data, we are going to want to add this object to our database. So let's go ahead and copy this. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is from this add a document page, we're going to want to import everything up here. Import doc and set doc from Firebase/Firestore. In addition, we're going to want to import DB from our database. Sorry. And this is in the directory before components. So we're going to do /database. So exactly that. So just these two imports And then we're done with importing for now. And then we're going to go to on submit. We're going to copy this await set doc. And we're going to paste it. Now, right now, this is for a city thing, and that's not what we want, right? We don't want cities to be added to our database. So we're going to replace cities, which is the collection name, with our collection name, which is collection name. And then we're going to add the ID of our object. And as I mentioned earlier, this has to be unique. So we're going to use this UUID up here. Now, before we do this, I'm actually going to create an object that is equal to this object right here. That way we can reuse it over and over. So replace this with object. All right. And then replace data with object. All right, so we've made a new object with all of the data from what we were adding to set to do. And then we've set to do the to do with the object. And we've replaced data with objects. And the final thing that we are going to do is get rid of this new city ID and replace it with our own object's ID. And again, it has to be unique. So we're going to do object.id because we know that ID is unique to our object. You'll notice that there's a little red squiggly line here. This is because we don't need this await function or this await keyword right here. So this is perfect. This should work. So let's go ahead to I'll give you guys a few seconds to catch up. Are we all good? Save it, very important. That is also very important. I'm a Windows user, so saving is new to me. So we're gonna go to our to-do list. I'm gonna full screen this. And we're going to, oh, never mind, I'm not gonna full screen it. Yeah, refresh. And so there's nothing here right now. So we're going to add a new, this is because we're not pulling anything from our, oh, geez. Apple's really not killing it with the Chrome dev tools. But okay, so if we go to our database, let's take a look to see if this actually added. So if we go to our to-do list, and we go to our Firestore database, we can see that the tasks collection has been initialized. There's a new document in there, and that's our object. So that's amazing. That means we've added a task to our tasks collection, which means it's actually working. So everyone try to test this out. Open up your web and then make a new object. So after all this is done, we're able to add data, but we're not reading any data from the database. So if I were to go over here really quickly and refresh, the data is gone again because we're not reading the data from the database. So the next step that we're going to be doing is reading from our database. Now, before we do this, we're going to cover a new concept in React that's super important and pretty straightforward. And this is called use effect. So everyone go to the top of your file where you imported React, and next to use state in this little object, use effect. All right. So now you're importing use effect in addition to use state. Now use effect is pretty straightforward. Basically what happens is it re-renders the page. I mean, every time that something is re-rendered within the page or a component is changed, then it executes a block of code. So it accepts two parameters, the first of which being a function. And this function is the code that it's going to execute every single time that use effect is run. The second parameter is optional. If you leave it blank, then it's going to run the code every single time that anything is changed on the page. If you add an array, it's going to change only when a component within that array is changed. So we're going to take a look at that right now. We're going to, under on submit, we're going to use effect. And this is going to take a function. So an anonymous function, we're going to declare it with open and closed parentheses. then an equal sign and a basically an arrow, and then brackets. For now, we're just going to console.log. Hello. Now, if we go over, if we save, and then we go over here and we reload, we will see that in the console, it says hello to us, which is very nice. If we add another parameter, we're going to name this, it's going to be an array and it's going to take title. Then when we save, every time when we refresh, every time we type in here, it's going to say hello to us. But this is not what we want. We want the data to be pulled from the database every time we load up the page. So what we're going to be using is just an empty array. When you pass an empty array, it's only going to run this function, this bit of code, whenever you load up your page. All right. So let's return to our docs. Hopefully. Okay. So we're done adding and managing our data. So let's go to read data. So we're reading data from the database. So go to read data in your documentation and get data once. That's what we're after. Now, all this is great, but what we're actually looking for is get all documents in a collection. So scroll down until you get to get all documents in a collection. As you can see, we import more things. So copy this line of imports and add it to your list, list.js at the top. So collection and get docs from Firebase/Firestore. All right, and so now we are going to use this. So as you can see, it basically just, you get docs from a collection, and the collection takes two parameters, the database and then the name of the collection. So we're going to copy this and we're going to paste it into our read data. The only thing we want is this get docs collection DB cities. So DB is the same for us and them because we named our database DB, but instead of cities, we are going to name this collection name. So as we can see, this is an asynchronous function. It uses a wait. So we're going to have to wait for it to return something before we can do anything with this data. So that's why we're going to use the .then function. So this is really exciting stuff. .then is also going to take in a function. So in this case, we're going to declare this function. So open, close, parentheses, arrow into brackets. And within these parentheses, we're going to name the data that is being returned to us. So get docs returns all the data within our collection. So we're going to call it tasks. And finally, we can see that there's a for each function that can go through all of our tasks and do something to it. So we're going to use this function. So we're going to use tasks.for each. And for right now, we're just going to console.log it. So again, it's another function. So we have for each task into console.log task. This part is not necessary, but it's really important for learning what exactly is going on within our code. So if we save, always remember to save, and then we refresh, we can see that our console log is returning two separate items, which is good because we have two items in our database. And we can see there's a lot of things going on here, and none of it really seems to be that important to us. None of it really makes that much sense. So that is why we are going to do, instead of task.data. And this is a function, so open. I did? Oh, I did. My bad. Task.data. Save again, and then refresh. Look at that. We have these little objects with all of the things in our collection. So it has our date, our ID, and our title. Now, if we look at this date, we're faced with an issue. The date in Firebase is stored as a timestamp, while we are using date objects in our code. So there's not really an easy way to transfer from a timestamp to normal date. So I'm just gonna teach you guys a quick way to do that. So the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to create a new object. We're going to call it new array. So let new array equal an empty array. We're going to initialize it to an empty array. And now within this block, tasks.forEach, we are going to do new array.push, and we're going to push a new object. And that object is going to have title. The title of that object is going to be task.data.title. The date is going to be new date task.data.date.seconds times 1000. And now what this is doing is it's taking the seconds and it's converting it to milliseconds, which date can use to turn into an actual date. So that's perfect. And the final thing that we are going to do is ID is equal to task.data.id. So after all of this executes, we are going to have a new array that's full of all of the objects that represent all of the tasks in our database. So the last thing that we really need to do is do set to do. And then we do our array, so new array. And then we save so that we don't forget to later. Let's take a look at and see if this is actually working. So now if we refresh, look at that. That's all of the stuff in our database. And if we add a new thing, hello, again, and we add it and we refresh, all three of them are still there, which is amazing. That's exactly what we wanted from our database. However, right now, I'm going to intro this and then I'll give you guys a second to catch up. If we delete from here, it doesn't delete from the database. So if we refresh, array is still there. We don't want that. We want to be able to delete from the database as well. So that's the last thing that we are going to do before we head into off. There it is. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and start talking about deleting tasks. This is pretty straightforward. Again, we're gonna return to, on the right computer, we're going to return to our documentation, and we're going to go to add and manage data, delete data. So add and manage data, then delete data. And it's the first thing here, just await delete doc, and then a doc that has DB, the name of the collection, and then the ID of the thing we're trying to delete. So first off, we are going to need to import everything up here. So copy this import doc and delete doc from Firebase/Firestore, and import it at the top. And as you can see, delete doc, our doc has already been imported, so we don't really need that. So we've imported delete doc, and then it's a simple line of code. So we're going to copy this line of code, and we're going to go down to where we remove our items. So remove item, and then we're going to paste this. So we're going to delete doc, and that document is going to be in the database DB. It's going to be in the collection. We're going to change cities to collection name. And then the ID of the object is going to be data.id. This is because we assigned the IDs of each of the docs to be the data's ID. So it's pretty straightforward. So delete doc db collection name data.id. Make sure you save, and then let's go see if this is working. So let's refresh our page, delete hooray. If we refresh, hooray is no longer there, hooray. So now we have adding data, reading data, and deleting data working in our database. So that's really exciting, that's really cool. So I'm gonna leave this up for a second and pass it off to Aadi to do off. More like Authy.
What do you see? Do it? Imports. Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, you just delete doc from Firebase Firestore. So what we can actually do is we can combine this, right? So I'll take this out, put it here. Wait, what? Oh, I think I copied the whole line. I'm just copy this word over here. And then I'm going to take this whole line out. All right, okay. So we probably will not do all of authentication today, but hopefully we can get started enough that it inspires you to come back for the next workshop. All right, so let me show you some issues that exist with this current format of databasing. So like I did earlier when I opened the thing in incognito, if I take this right now, open an incognito window, go in, bam, I can see both of those tasks, and I can add one. This is like a separate user doing it, right? Because the incognito tab has no relation to the other tab, and I add like a task, it's like random text, and go here and refresh. I can see this. So now we have like a community to-do list happening, but we want to have like everyone's personal to-do list that has nothing to do with the other person. Okay, so I'm gonna close this for now. Go back to our documentation. We need to go back to Firebase because I don't know if you all noticed, but there was like a little tab that said authentication. So let's go to to-do list, Firebase. Here, if you see Firestore database, right above Firestore database, authentication. So I'm going to click on that. Get started, because we are getting started with authentication. And we're going to do Google for now, because I know for sure everyone here has like a Google email, because a Vanderbilt email itself is like a Google email, right? So click on Google, click on enable, go to project about email, just select your, I'm going to select Kevin's because I have his laptop, save. And it looks like this takes a second, but hopefully it worked for you as it did for me. And our job in Firebase itself is done. And now we're going to take a leaf from what Kyle did with database and click go to docs. So we can figure out the documentation for authentication, because, and you know that it's super easy to do this because I had no idea how to do this yesterday. And now I'm telling you how to do it. So let's go to, what are we looking for here? Yes, build, and then authentication. Let's see, where do I start? Well, I know where to start. Get started in web, because we're making this for the web. It's on the sidebar to the left under web, get started. We already have the Firebase stuff installed, but so we need to make these changes. So I'm gonna copy this import line, import get auth from Firebase auth, and I will actually try to do like a split screen thing. So it's easier to do. Wait, how do I split screen? Hey, Kevin. Oh, well, I'm just going to copy it actually, no split screen, I guess. Go to VS Code. Go to database.js. Well, since this is where we did most of our stuff before, I'm going to paste the import line. And then I'm going to, yeah. I'm going to copy this last line from our documentation. I'm still trying to figure out how I can make it not be full screen. Kevin, how do I make it not be full screen? Safari, escape. Wait. Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, this is helpful. Okay. The reason I want to do it like this is because it will be super easy to copy paste when we have both the things side by side. So let's see code. I'm gonna escape here as well. All right. Get rid of this. Make this smaller. 1 second. All right. We put this here. We put this here. And then I'm going to copy this last line here, const auth equals to get auth app. Copy this, go here. In a similar fashion, export, and then paste it. Okay, so now we have our auth app exported. So we've just added 2 lines so far. This line at the bottom, and then up top, we've added the import get auth from Firebase/auth. And that's the 2 things we've done so far. Now, we're gonna want to do stuff conditionally now, right? Like if a person is like not signed in, then we want them to sign in. And if they're signed in, then we want to show them their list, right? So this stuff will happen where like we currently display this stuff to our user. But we want to capture the state now, the state with like the user is logged in or not. And we're gonna use a package to help us do this, a package that provides some hooks so that we can sort of like hook into the state object to the user logged in object and do stuff based on that. So the library that we're going to be using is called, let me see, let me do a new tab thing. It's going to be called React Firebase hooks. Okay, this one, the first one. And let's see. Instructions, npm install React Firebase hooks. So we go back to VS Code. We do npm I here at the bottom. React Firebase hooks. Okay, and by the time it loads, we can sort of see how we use this library. So we go to scroll down on the npm page, look at authentication hooks. That's what we want to do. So I'm going to click on that. I get to the GitHub, use auth state, right? So there we go. I'm going to copy this line now. There's a nice little copy button here in GitHub because they know that's what people do. And now we're going to add at some place in our code, we want to sort of like add this thing like the checks if the user is logged in or not, right? So let's go to App.js because that's where we sort of like do this stuff. That's where we display our list. So I'm opening App.js. So as you can see right here, we currently just display this list to the person. But now we want to check if the person is logged in or not. So let's do some imports. First off, we want to get that auth object that we had, right? So I'm going to do import auth from. Now, it's not exactly from database, but it's from the database file. So I'm going to do from /database. And now we want to use the hook that we just installed, right? So I'm going to do import use auth state. Let me see what the import there looks like. Actually, I'm going to go back to the documentation. There they have it. So I'm going to just copy that line over. I encourage you to do the same. And there we go. Cool. And now I can go here inside app, and we're going to copy one more line as they are doing here. In current user, they're doing const user loading error use auth state auth. So I'm going to copy this over as well. Copy this. Go inside app, paste this. Now we don't really care about errors. Well, we sort of do, but I'm hoping they won't happen. We don't care about the loading state as well. So I'm going to remove those parts. So now we just have like the user object that tells us the person has logged in or not. Okay. Now I'm going to only display this list if the user has logged in. So I'm going to first off wrap this in curly braces. because we're going to do this conditionally. And then do user and list. This means if the user object exists, only then show the person the list, which begs the question, what do we do if the user is not logged in? But before we get into that, I want to ask if, have you all done so far? So far, so good? All right. It is 7:30, by the way, as I've just been told. So we're going to wrap this up super quickly. We add another line that does the stuff when the user object does not exist. And then we want to show a different component. We want to have the person log in. So let's just return like a login component that doesn't exist so far. And it should be an empty one. So I'm going to do a slash here. And there is no login component as this red line tells us right now, which means our code is currently broken. So I'm going to start this component off by going into components, new file, doing a login.js, and just importing it. And we're going to do the rest of it next time. And like we do import list from components list, I'm going to do import login from /components/login. Yeah. Next week, we're going to begin from here. We're going to make a nice login component, have a nice little button for the user to press, and then they get logged in, and then they can see their list. And then we're going to hook this list up to their user account, where like they will be able to have access to just their information. But that's for next time. So I'm just going to leave with the thing we always forget to do, which is the feedback form. Kevin, do you know?
Yeah.
Oh, the take homes as well.
Yeah. So if you go to vhl.inc/takehomes, obviously we only have an hour and a half together every 2 weeks. So there are plenty of opportunities that we put here for you to kind of practice some of the things that we're doing, as well as kind of make this to-do list your own. Because at the end of the day, everyone can make a to-do list. The question is, how do you make it original? So, we have a little take home here with a couple of challenges, like listening for key events. So when you hit enter, instead of having to add, it will submit it. Like turning overdue events red because they're bad, as well as, like adding some sort of like feel good features to kind of make your to-do list a little special, just like other to-do list applications out there. So definitely try those out. Let us know if you have any questions. And then, if you have any feedback for us, definitely make sure to drop it really quickly in vhl.inc/feedback for a chance at some good old VH swag. Connie over there won a tumbler, so congrats to you. So we're gonna get that to her at the end of the workshop. So yeah, that's it. Thank you guys. And then we'll stick around if you still have any last minute stuff or questions or anything. Yeah.